Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're having an awesome day, but if not, we've got just the thing for you. It's the Vampire Warden, our very first Skyrim SC character build that includes a full backstory, extremely fun playstyle, and a few of our choice mods that work very, very well with this character build. As a child, the Vampire Warden lived peacefully as a nobleman with his father, mother, and grandfather during the late Third Era. The Warden, however, rarely saw his father for the first few years of his life, as his father was an ambassador of Skyrim, who would often be sent to the Imperial City for years at a time. And while his father was abroad, the Warden grew up to be a charismatic young teenager, who invested his time in learning the arts of swordplay in the courtyard outside of his father's home, and learning healing magic while he studied at the Solitude's Temple of the Divines. He was a strapping young Nordic man who was a popular hit with the local maidens, and all around he was very liked by the local populace. But still he daydreamed about the time when he could finally travel to the world and learn the foreign cultures he'd heard of in his studies, and meet extraordinary characters and see amazing sights. One day when his father returned from a 3-year voyage, he asked his father if he could journey with him to Cyrodiil the next time he was sent on a mission of diplomacy. He agreed to take his son with him to the Imperial City in a few months on the condition that he would listen to and heed his father's instructions the entire time. The Warden joyfully announced to his mother and grandfather that he was going off on an adventure for the first time, and that he would miss them dearly, but that he was ready to see the world. His mother wept at the revelation that her son was growing up and may soon leave her, but she shared in his joy all the same. The Warden's grandfather took his grandson into the attic that night. From the old man's many belongings, he pulled a sword wrapped in cloth and a leather coat that was inscribed with fine runes and very ornate decorative patterns. The sword and cloak were both very finely crafted pieces of art. The cloak had scaled plates of Nordic steel woven into the outside of the sleeves, and light plates on the shoulder that were subtle enough to sit under the collar without raising it. The old Nord told his grandson that his magic was strong and his sword arm was stronger. He was ready for adventure, and as such, he should bear his grandfather's gifts. The Warden traveled with his father in a caravan across Skyrim's southern border, and he was off into the next chapter of his life. The Warden was a hit in the Imperial City just as he was at home. He met many a young Imperial woman that he couldn't take his eyes off of, but he soon had a favorite, a young woman who never failed to capture his gaze, but who also never failed to hold his conversation. Even though he was away from his friends, family, and teachers, he felt at home with her, and within a year he was spending all of his time with her in the way that only a smitten young heart could. However, none of it was to last. Tragedy befell the ensemble as the Oblivion Gates opened and Daedric monstrosities invaded Tamriel. The Warden and his young love ran through the streets, searching desperately for an escape from the chaos around them. The young couple almost split as the young woman wanted to search for her family, whilst the Warden wanted to find his father. However, before they could find a course of action, the Warden felt his heart break, as a Daedric sword pierced his young lover's chest. She fell to the ground, and before him stood a vampire lord, a monstrous creation of Molech Bal. He unsheathed his sword and lunged at the beast. However, all of his attempts were in vain. The monster was faster than him, and much, much stronger. With a single swipe, the vampire tore the armored plates from the Warden's arm, and opened up his flesh. The Warden fell back, having never felt such pain in his life. As he lay on his back, clutching his bleeding, broken arm, he looked on and saw the young woman who gave him her heart, looking at him and trying to move her arm to pull her broken body towards him. With a new rush of adrenaline pumping through him, he cast the close wound spell with his unbroken arm and took his sword to the beast again. He ducked and wove his way around the vampire and thrust his sword into the back of the monster, only for it to turn to a cloud of bats and reappear some distance from him. The monster cast a hemomancy spell towards the Warden, and the Warden blocked the spell with a greater ward, feeling the impact through his whole body. As the spell cleared, he heard the fluttering of bat wings, and saw that the vampire was no longer before him. Instead, he felt a sharp, paralyzing pain as the vampire's fangs pierced his neck from behind. The Warden felt his energy draining as he felt his life leaving him, when in a split decision, he brought up his grandfather's sword and plunged it through his own chest and into the stomach of the monster behind him. The vampire let its victim drop to the ground and reeled from the hole in its gut, pouring vampiric blood. The vampire transformed again, this time into a cloud of black smoke, only for the Warden to never see him ever again. The Warden lay on the ground bleeding to death, and fighting through every breath to pull himself to the woman he loved. He put his hand into hers, intertwining their fingers, and felt that her skin was cold. Stricken with heartbreak and pain, he pressed his forehead to hers, and was content to let death have him. He let his soul join hers in the next life, and so the Warden lay there bleeding to death into the cobblestones, and died. The Warden awoke in a cold sweat. He felt cold. The Warden reached to his chest, and instead of an open wound, he felt a scar. He suddenly registered the smell, a stench of death. He threw himself up and sat in a ditch. Upon a pile of rotting corpses sat the once noble and proud man in the tattered remains of his grandfather's coat. Piled up around him were bodies, some whole, some dismembered. He stumbled down a mountain of dead and saw his father. He saw his own father missing all of his limbs and with an enormous gash in his throat and face. The inhuman work of the Daedra sickened him, and he knew he didn't want to stay here. As he walked aimlessly through the forest, he heard strange sounds and saw hues of light. He heard the fast-paced beating of a rabbit's heart and felt a ray of sunlight stinging and burning as it touched his skin through the forest canopy. He realized in that moment what he was. He was a monster. He was a vampire. He was the abomination that had taken so many lives. In this moment, he also realized the true depth of what he was. He was now the equal of the monster that had taken everything from him. He was now imbued with monstrous power and the swordplay and healing skills that he had learned in his short life together. He decided, right then, that he would hunt monsters. He would protect those like him and his family that would be hurt by the Daedra, and after a lifetime of wandering, he has decided to come home. Now that we've got the backstory out of the way, let's get on to roleplaying and playstyle. If you have the alternate start mod, then you should choose to be a vampire hidden in a secluded lair, and roleplay that the Warden got across the border with no issue. However, without this mod, you can still play this in the vanilla start of the game, and just suspend your roleplaying until you can achieve vampirism. This can usually be done by activating God mode and then spawning a fledgling so they can use vampiric drain on you until you achieve an infection of the Sanguinari Vampirus. After this, the skills you'll want to level will obviously be one-handed for swordplay and restoration for healing magic. You may also consider destruction for hemomancy spells. Some other important skills will be light armor, smithing, and enchanting. Light armor will allow us to make better use of the lightweight traveler's gear that the Warden will be favoring, and smithing and enchanting will allow us to create the most effective and deadly gear. The Warden will actively seek ways to become more powerful, gaining any kind of edge he can in order to fight the creatures of the night. The Warden will dedicate himself to stop unnecessary suffering whenever possible. He will destroy the Dark Brotherhood, and he will cure himself and the companions of lycanthropy. Even though the Warden is a skilled healer, you can skip the College of Winterhold if you don't want to play the college questline. Some essential mods you'll want to use to make the most of this character are obviously the aforementioned Live a Different Life or Ultimate Start mod. Some other mods that we'll definitely want to use will be Sacrosanct, which will vastly improve upon the vampiric player powers, as well as the role-playing possibilities that the vanilla vampire simply does not offer. Better vampires and better vampire NPCs are also both fantastic additions. Better vampires will improve the vampiric powers even more, and help the player truly feel like a lion among sheep. Ordinator perk overhaul will breathe new life into the perk trees of Skyrim, giving us a lot of options to play with, and improving upon some of the less balanced perks of the vanilla game. Another fantastic gameplay mod we can use is the Andromeda Standing Stones of Skyrim, which will give us a brand new dynamic of strategy and lore with the Standing Stones. This is especially fun when used with the Ethereal Crown from the Dawnguard DLC, which allows us to have 2 Standing Stone effects active at a single time. One of the coolest looking armor mods, in my opinion, is the Volkihar Knight armor set, which we can use to recreate the leather-plated armor that was the Warden's gift from his grandfather once so long ago. Moving a bit further into the gameplay section, our stat spread is going to be 70% health and 30% magicka. Stamina isn't going to be terribly important to this build, seeing as we're mostly going to be focused on one-handed DPS and staying alive using our healing spells. We will not need stamina to use a bow, and we aren't going to be using a whole lot of power attacks. We're better off using the one-handed perk tree to reduce the stamina cost of our one-handed power attacks anyways. This character has decent mobility allowed by the use of light armor and a light weapon, so we aren't going to be pressed for carry weight by our equipment either. From the one-handed tree, take every swordplay perk that you can, simple as that. In the light armor tree, you'll want to take light armor mastery, light armor fit, and as a leaf just to cover your basic light armor perk skills. The baseline skills for creating our equipment will be smithing up to ebony, and from the enchanting tree, take the entire inner right hand branch. This will grant us the ability to strengthen the magic that we can imbue into our weapons and armor, and once enchanting is leveled to 100, we can create a single super duper powerful piece of equipment that we'll never be able to make again. How neat is that? Some things to consider for role-playing this character is that the Warden, even though old by human standards, is still roughly only 225 years old, which is very young by vampire standards. The Warden will side with the Volkihar clan during the Dawnguard DLC simply because we cannot remain a Dawnguard member while simultaneously a vampire, and also because the Warden finds the Dawnguard to be almost cult-like in their hatred of vampires. And whilst vampires are a threat to the general populace, they are far and away not the only threat to Nern. The Warden will be monstrously protective of the characters he perceives to be his friends and family, still suffering from the trauma of having lost his own family in such a gruesome way so long ago. The Warden obviously has a bit of a grudge against the Daedra, but he understands the concept of a gray area unlike the Dawnguard or the vigilance of Stendarr. He recognizes when a creature of the night like Serana, the vampire herself, is still very much a person and can suffer too. The Warden may not like most werewolves or vampires, but he's never made it a goal to hunt any creature into extinction, but rather to protect innocent lives from the ones that would make them suffer. Thank you guys so very much for watching our first character build. I promise we'll be doing more of these, given how much fun it was to put this video together. So like if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it, and subscribe and share this with your friends if you loved it. This is Nerd Herd Incorporated. My name is Happy. I will see you all later.